States Navy. I served with the Army and the Air Force.
You served with the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force?
I'm in the Navy, but all of the services were working together.
Okay, and I'll have you explain that later in the interview, how that worked. What was your highest rank?
E7.
All right, Jim, let's go to the beginning of your military experience. Where were you living when you enlisted?
I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I went to the MEP station in Chicago.
Why did you enlist?
It's a little bit of a story. I was working in the trades as a union electrician, and I was laid off. And looking through the WAN ads, and I actually saw one ad that said, looking for firefighters, call 1-800, and they had a 1-800 number. And when I called it, the guy picked up and said Navy recruiting, which wasn't exactly what I expected. But I went in anyway, and they had some testing and things like that done, and then the recruiter got a hold of me and told me what kind of things were available.
So when you originally called, you weren't even looking to go into the Navy?
Not originally.
What did the recruiter say that changed your mind, that made you want to go in?
He talked about education benefits. I think he heard me say that I wish I'd paid a little more attention in high school, and that I felt I'd be a much better student at that point in my life than I was coming out of high school. And he also heard me say that I ran marathons at that point, and he told me about the Navy running team and tuition assistance for veterans. And it seemed like each interest I had, there was something in the Navy that would have been something that would have been good for me or my family.
Do you recall the date?
The 22nd of November in 1992.
What was it like when you first got in? So you signed up November 22nd. Did you go immediately to basic training, or did you have time at home first?
I had about 2 weeks before I was to report for boot camp. And it was just outside of Chicago because I was going to Great Lakes. And I was from Chicago, so it really wasn't very far for me to go there.
So your basic training was at Great Lakes?
Yes.
And how long did that take?
That's a 10-week course at Great Lakes, going through boot camp.
What was that like? What were some of the things that they taught you?
Well, I came in, I was 34 when I enlisted. So when I came in, I think my perspective was a lot different. And as a couple of the guys in my unit pointed out, that they were exactly half my age. Some of the guys in my group were 17. But my perspective was a lot different. I knew that it was something that I had to go through, and I just looked at it where I could learn as much as I possibly could and be prepared for what came after that.
Was there both physical training and classroom training in basic?
There is. They have a mixture of, there's marching, there's exercise. They actually have an Olympics at the end of a boot camp. And then there's a lot of classroom where they talk about Navy heritage, and they talk about proper use of a chain of command, and they just break people in, sometimes in a real lesson, like a life-changing manner, just to make sure people know that we're all on the same page. And a lot of us came in with individualism, and they wanted us to come out with teamwork in mind.
As an older fella, were you able to keep up with the physical work?
I did a real good job in boot camp, mostly because I was really active. I was doing triathlons at that point and running in marathons, so the physical side of things wasn't difficult for me.
Was there graduation at the end of your basic training?
Yes.
And after that graduation, where did you go?
From there, when I signed up with the recruiter, I had opted to go to Hospital Corpsman A school is what they call them. I think A school is just an initial school. So directly from boot camp, I went to Hospital Corpsman A school, and that was also in Great Lakes.
And how long did that training take?
If I'm remembering right now, it's an 8-week course.
Why did you choose to go to corpsman school?
I had a cousin who was in the Navy at that time, and when you take the test with the recruiters, they tell you what schools you're eligible for based on your test scores. So he said some of the nuclear rates because I was pretty strong in math, and then just based on the scores, they say these are the schools that are available to you. Which one do you think you have an affinity for? Which one would you like to pursue? My cousin was a hospital corpsman, and he told me the nice thing about that rate is that you can branch off into any one of a huge number of areas within the medical field. And at that time, since I'd been laid off, that was one of the reasons I was in the service. I thought, well, the medical rate is pretty recession-proof. So I was planning on coming in, doing my 4 years, and maybe getting as much education as I could, and then trying to find a career that's recession-proof.
What was the 8 weeks in hospital corpsman school like? What kinds of things did they teach you there?
They at that point, it just was a lot of anatomy and physiology. That was a big part of it. And then they teach you a lot of the basic like drawing blood, starting IVs. They would have, I think they accentuate more the combat medical care because that's advanced so much in the 20 years I've been in. But at that point, it just was a lot of basic medical information that you could take and expand upon later.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
I can picture them all. But I don't remember names anymore.
Now, when you went to corpsman school, it was still in the 1990s. Was 92 or 93. We were not even in a war yet. Did you expect to have any actual combat work?
No, actually, I never really even thought about it. It's funny, even being an older person. When I enlisted in the Navy, I really hadn't even thought about leaving Chicago. I thought I would live there my whole entire life for some reason, and I was even a little caught off guard when all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, so I have to move now? And so I was a little surprised. I never really thought about combat experience, but there were a number of instructors at Hospital Corps School that were in the original Gulf War. And when I looked at them, I was even a little intimidated just with what they knew and what they'd experienced. And it was my first personal contact with someone who actually had been in a war that I just followed in the newspapers and on television like about everyone else.
After your corpsman school, where did you go?
We had a choice coming out of Hospital Corps School to go on to other, and C schools are the more advanced schools. And because I had done well in school, they gave us a list of schools that were available, and they're for particular rates like X-ray techs or cardiovascular technicians or surgery technicians. And the schools that I was looking for weren't available. And they said, if you still want to go to one of these schools, we're going to send you to Radiation Health School. And so I went to Radiation Health School in Groton, Connecticut from there.
So that's how you got to Connecticut. What was Radiation Health School like? What did they teach you there?
A lot of radiation safety. And a lot of the people who work in that field can work, like in nuclear power plants. They're people who do the dosimetry and monitoring exposure in the various fields that deal with radiation. And so it's just sort of teaching you how to track and monitor people within those programs. But a lot of them work in radiation safety after that.
Now, this was at the Groton, Connecticut subbase?
Yes.
That's where you were actually stationed. How long did that training go on?
That was, I want to say that was also a 7 or 8 week school.
And where did you go when you finished that?
I got orders to go to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which at that point, I didn't realize that New Hampshire had a coast. So I was thinking, why are they sending me to the mountains? And one guy said, no, they have a coast. I said, no, they don't. I've looked at maps before. And they said, no, they have a coast. But it's right on the, Portsmouth, New Hampshire is right on the border of Maine and New Hampshire.
And what were your duties there?
I worked as a radiation health tech, and it's a base that reconditions submarines. So they would have a dosimetry, or they would have the radiation exposure monitoring programs that I would help with there. And then people on the base, civilian workers and things like that would also have that. So we just ran the monitoring programs for those individuals.
Was there a clinic or a hospital right on the base?
Yes. It was a clinic at that point, because at that, the Navy was downgrading a lot of the hospitals to clinics in the early 90s. So
you worked at the clinic. What was that like? Was it like a regular 9-to-5 job every day?
It was. I enjoyed it there, because looking out the window, you could see the back bay that goes where the submarines are going out to the ocean. And I'd never been on the East Coast before that, especially since I didn't realize that New Hampshire even had a coastline. But I was excited about the idea of being in New England. And my wife and I had only been married for about a year at that point, and I thought this gives us a chance to see the different New England states and travel around, and we can make a really good time out of it. I was going to be there for 3 years.
Did you live on base or off base?
Just off base. And it was, I would actually drive from the base that was considered New Hampshire. And there's a real debate going on about the New Hampshire and Maine thing, which I was going to do an English essay on the history of that debate. And I was actually told I wouldn't even get in the middle of all this, because people are really passionate about it. But we would go from the base, which was considered New Hampshire, but had a telephone exchange that was Maine. And then I would drive right off base, and then we were in Maine. But
so
you could look and see the base.
In Maine and worked in New Hampshire?
Yeah.
How long did you stay at Portsmouth?
We were there for three and a half years.
So you did spend 3.5 years there. How would you classify that duty? In general, what did you do? Like, what would a typical day be like for you?
Well, we would go. We had our clinic. They would have the quarters there, and there was it wasn't a large staff, but it basically it was like a 9-to-5 job. There would be paperwork to do, and then they would have medical duties in the meantime. They were real active about giving us courses. We were able to go through like an EMT basic, because part of our duties were to stand a watch. That was they had EMTs and ambulances at that point. So there were a lot of schools that were available. You could take a lifeguard course there. It just it was an invigorating time for me. I liked being stationed there. And then once again, a lot of the guys that I was with were Gulf War veterans, and they were real active about learning different things. They were going through paramedic school. It seemed like everyone was really motivated to make the most of their time at a shore command.
Do you have any memorable experiences from your time at Portsmouth?
I think the people I worked with there, I think, were the real highlight. And I got along really well with the civilians. There were more civilians working in the clinic than medical staff. But they were real active in all kinds of different things. It's like we had about a 1-year period where if a person could think of any interest, we would have a tournament. And that could be cribbage, it could be beach volleyball, a basketball, a horse. And I'd have to say that I started some of that because I had, there was a friend of mine who was pretty much like just a little bit better than me at most things. And he maybe beat me in 100 games of chess in a row. And one time when he was distracted, I managed to win a game, and I declared myself the clinic chess champion. And that just sort of launched a whole bunch of different things. Someone said, well, how did you get to be the chess champion? And I said, well, I managed to beat Kevin in a game, which he wanted a rematch, of course, and I tried to avoid that as long as I could.
After your 3.5 years at Portsmouth, where'd you go?
I went to advanced X-ray school, and that was down in Portsmouth, Virginia, at the Naval School of Health Sciences. And that was a 13-month-long school.
13 months?
Yep.
Wow.
I think it's a 2-year civilian course, and they put you through. It's a lot more of anatomy and physiology, and then there was a lot of radiation information, which I was a radiation health technician, so that helped me a little bit in that way. After
the 13-month course, were you a certified X-ray technician?
We could take the national certification and be nationally certified as X-ray techs.
Did you take that?
I did, yeah.
Where were you living when you were training in Virginia? Was it on base or off base?
We lived in Virginia Beach. There was Navy housing there that was right off the Little Creek Naval Base. So we stayed there we wound up being there for almost 5 years.
The 13 months of training, was that just like getting up and going to college classes every day?
That was exactly what it was like. And I would go in anytime I went to a school, and I think because I was older, I valued the opportunity to go to school, and I wanted to do the best job I could in any of the school. I thought that I had to be like among the best in each one. So in each course I took. But that course was really competitive. They had some real bright people in the class, and that was sort of a motivating factor too. There were any one of 10 to 12 people out of a class of 40 that could have been among the top students. And people worked together really well. They helped each other out. But I basically would go in 7 days a week. Whenever the school was open, I was in there studying. And I wanted to do really well coming out of school.
After your 13 months of training, what did you do?
I was sent, they told us throughout school, they said, I know a lot of you advanced X-ray techs, you all want to go out to sea, but they said there are no billets for advanced X-ray techs to go out to sea right now. So in conversations with my wife, I would come home and she would say, well, I was talking to the neighbor, and the neighbor said, right out of school, you're going to sea. And I would just say, but your neighbor is a machinist mate, and that's what they do. They go out to sea. I'm telling you right now, there are no billets at sea. So I said this for 13 months, and she kept on saying, well, she's telling me you're going straight out to sea. Well, when they said that the orders were there, I called up and I said, we're getting our orders now. I'll call you right back and tell you where we're going. And my name was first. We all sat down and they said, HM2 Enderle, you're going to the USS Wasp. And I stood there stunned for a minute, so I called back, and Cindy answered, and she said, you're going to sea, aren't you? And I said, yes, I'm going to the USS Wasp. And then it was immediate because they were deployed at that point. So they were off the coast of Portugal, and they just had begun a 6-month cruise, maybe a month before that.
Do you recall what year this was?
1998.
So you had to leave immediately and join the WASP?
Yeah, I had about 4 or 5 days. They said, get all the gear together, and then you have to go through the power of attorney and writing wills and things like that. So they had workshops right there, which they just have it really pretty polished. So I went through all those things and got on a plane and flew straight to Italy, which was on the opposite end of Europe where the ship actually was. But when I got there, they said the WASP isn't going to be here we don't even know when they're going to be here. And I said, I was told they were in Italy, and I had to get here right away. And they said, well, right now it's off the coast of Portugal. And they said, well, here's the thing. You can either go on leave, or you can just stay here and work like as a clinic staff member until the ship gets here. And I thought about it for a microsecond, and I thought, wait, I'm in Europe. I've barely left the United States in my life. So I said, well, I'm going to go on leave. And I went, and just happened to go as I was walking by, there was, as fate would have it, a guy said, I have a Enderle pass. He was walking around waving it around. He said, I just got transferred up to Lithuania and I have a Enderle pass that's going to expire. Does anyone want it? And I said, well, I've got, it was for 5 days, unlimited travel. And I said, well, I didn't take a credit card or anything with me. And I said, well, I have about $250 to my name. And I said, I'll give you $150 for it. And he said, no, I'm not going to take less than $400 for it. He said, I bought it. Well, I want to, eventually no one else took his pass. And then he came back and he said, give me $200 and the pass is yours. And I thought a chance to travel Europe, even by myself, and I don't speak other languages fluently, I couldn't pass it up. So I spent 5 days just sleeping on Eurail trains and running out of food and everything else. But I thought that I may only have one chance in my life to do this, so I didn't want to pass it up.
So what countries did you visit on the pass?
I went through Italy, then I went through Slovenia, up to Hungary. I caught like a little corner of Slovakia, Austria, Switzerland, France, Monaco, and then back through Italy on the other side. A little part of Germany, I went to Lindau.
When you got back to the base in Italy, how long did you have to wait there before your ship actually came in?
Well, they when I got there, they said that the ship was just leaving Spain. And they said, if you want to join the ship, they were asking if they want to join the ship, then you can go to Spain and wait for them there. And then from there, they can helicopter you out, which it actually still was off the coast of Portugal by the time I got out to the ship. So within a couple days, they flew me to Spain from one air base to another. And then the next day, I just got on a helicopter and they flew me right over Spain and Portugal and right out into the ocean and just dropped me right on the flight deck.
Now, when you arrived on the WASP, what were your duties? Were you there to be just an X-ray technician or to do more general medical work as a corpsman? Well,
they have, when I got to the ship, I met up with the senior enlisted people at that time, and the first thing he told me is, you're a sailor first. You belong to the ship first. You belong to the medical department second. And then your duties are as an X-ray tech. So they were big believers in cross-training because we had a small staff. There were only 16 people, and then they had the Marine corpsmen who would supplement it, and they also had a fleet surgical team that would supplement the medical staff. But out of those people, we had to take care of a ship of 2,500 people. So there were a lot. So they said the more you know how to do, the better it is for everybody. So they pushed a lot of cross-training, and they expected me to be able to do sick call and everything else, just like everyone.
How long did you serve on the USS Wasp?
I was on the Wasp for 3 years, and we went through 2 deployments.
All right. When you first got on there, and you were one of the 16 people that's on the medical staff, what were your daily duties like? What kinds of things would you work on?
We would wake up in the morning and we would have sick call was twice a day. It would start early in the morning and go through to about lunchtime, and then right after lunch it would start again and go until about 3 o'clock or 3:30, and then after that a duty crew would take over the sick call duties. If someone needed to be seen after those hours, they could come up to the medical department at any time, and someone would take them in. We had 2 doctors on board, and then a series of nurses and other staff. But on our ship, we actually had operating rooms. The Wasp is in some ways is like a floating hospital. They had a huge ward, so that the ship could have been easily equipped for humanitarian missions or for anything else. So there was a lot of training. And then other than that, there were things like we would, that we'd have a time in the day that everyone complained about where we'd have to sort our garbage. And then some of the things that were recyclable, we would recycle. And that was a big thing on the ship, was trying to be responsible about what we kept and recycled.
What was your work day like? Was it again like a 9 to 5?
It was, the hours are longer, and it seems like the crew has a much better rapport, I think, because when you're out to sea, there isn't anywhere else to go. And if there's small difficulties getting along with people, I think you get over it pretty quickly. We did like a lot of, I don't think we planned on it, but there were like a lot of team building kinds of things. We just would find ourselves together doing things and going to lunch together. But the days, I think, are a lot longer. People tend to be real productive when they're out to sea. And that could be studying for advancement or they just were beginning the online courses because the computer systems weren't really fully installed yet as far as internet. But it seemed like people were doing a lot of self-improvement things. They would have college courses available on the ship, and then they would have warfare qualification courses, and there were a lot of things you could do.
Courses?
I took all of them. The day I got to the ship, I don't even think I was out of my dress whites yet. I got my warfare qualification book. And the senior chief, I went in and she's just going, oh, here's another guy. What's this? I said, I'm here for my warfare qualification book. And she's like, well, you can even change into your dungarees first. But I was excited because I thought it'll give me a chance to work with different rates. I never really had worked with anyone but medical personnel up until that time in my life. So I was looking forward to it. It's like a floating city. And everyone all has their own duties and everything seems to get done somehow. It's amazing how things get done. What
typically were the sicknesses, diseases, injuries that you would see?
They would have physical injuries occasionally. But I think like seasickness, and I think like just rental. They had some of the people would just come up. They're just going, I'm working. Some of the departments, if they were shorthanded when we deployed, would be working 6 hours on and 6 hours off, and it was hard for a lot of the people, like the cooks, and there's like certain rates where they just work long hours. And sometimes he would just come down and say, I'm just tired. I just feel like I need a break. And I don't want to be sick in quarters where I'm not working. But I sure would welcome a break. And I think that they'd sort of feel that obligation, like if I'm not working, then that means someone else is working like a time and a half just about to try to cover. But I think there weren't a lot of really complicated things. A lot of it, I think, is just general sick call things. It's general malaise and being tired and cold symptoms and things, headaches.
And you said that you were 3 years on the WASP and 2 separate deployments. Where were those 2 deployments? They both were to the Mediterranean Sea, and the first one was when I joined the ship. And then we came back from that, and almost as soon as you come back from one cycle, you go into the shipyard where they try to correct different things. Which shipyard did you go to?
Portsmouth, Virginia.
Oh, so you went back to where you, okay.
So we went back to Virginia, and then basically they put it in the shipyard, they tear everything apart, put everything all back together, and then you just start gearing up for the next deployment.
How much time would elapse between the deployments?
Let's see, we would leave, it would be 18 months. We would return from one deployment, we came back in August of '98, and then in February of 2000, we would go right back out again. So it would be an 18-month period.
So 18 months you'd be home on leave, or would you be on leave or would you be on duty?
We would be on duty, and then right after the shipyard period, you basically you have to go out to sea, and then you have systems testing and weapons testing and qualifications for the ship before it can deploy again. So you're basically in and out again for, maybe like an 8-month period, 8 months to a year period that you're pretty much in and out all the time.
The 18 months that you were on shore back home again, they were fixing the boat and all that, where did you have to go to work? Was there a clinic right there in Virginia that you'd go in, or did you report to the WASP every day even though they're working on it?
We just report back to the ship, and we would go in and, which was sort of funny because we went to the medical department and the medical department was almost completely torn out and they were repainting things. But we would still have our general duties. We would go in, some days would be shorter days. I think if they could afford, like on most ships or on submarines, I think when they can afford to let people go a little early, they do. But we would have our duties and they would say, let's all work together, let's get the things done, and then we can all go home and be with our families before we start the workup cycle again.
So when the ship was docked, you could go home at night and spend time with your family, and then just report to the ship for your work hours. Yes.
And we would have duty every 3 days at that point, and then they modified it later where it was every 6 days, where you would come and spend the night on the ship.
Now, your second deployment, what was the year for that?
We left in February of 2000, and then we also went to the Mediterranean Sea that year.
And was it similar to your first deployment, doing exactly the same thing?
It was pretty much the same cycle. They would the beginning of the deployment, everyone's excited because they try to guess at the ports of call we'll have, and in the first deployment, everyone wanted to go to Ibiza, which they're a series of the Majorcan islands that belong to Spain, and for some reason or another, everyone wanted to go there. You can get pearls cheap, and the beaches are great, but it seemed one guy said, Majorca is it's on the list every single time, and it turns out we never go there. And that year in 2000, we actually were able to stop there for, I think, for about 3 days, and it was really beautiful.
Where did you go after that deployment?
After that deployment, we were still in the shipyards, and then in March of that year, I was due to leave the ship, which it was hard for me to leave that ship because there were things about the ship I really enjoyed.
2000 or 2001?
2001. It was March of 2001, and when I left there, I went to submarine IDC school.
Submarine what?
Submarine, and it's Independent Duty Corpsman School.
What's that?
They train people, and in the submarine community, there's one medical person in charge of an entire crew on the submarine. So they basically are teaching them to be like the chief cook and bottle washer of the medical department. And it has to be, I think it has to be the most challenging job that an enlisted person can have. It's an incredible amount of responsibility. And they teach you anything from minor surgeries to, it's immense because whatever medical calls you have to make, if it's an emergency call, you have to be the person to go to tell the captain of that ship, oh, we're going to have to surface and get him off the ship. And the amount of responsibility is immense.
Where did you go for the IDC school?
Back to Groton, Connecticut.
How long was that training?
That's also a year-long school, and the information comes fast and furiously.
Did you volunteer for that, or did the Navy tell you that's where you were going?
I volunteered for it, and I just had made first class, which is at an E6 level, and at that point I'd had a very good tour on the WASP, and I felt real empowered. When I left, I was involved in a lot of different programs and a lot of the things that I never had really done in my life. I don't even think I realized I was capable of a lot of the things. I was involved in the different warfare programs, and I thought that I could tackle anything. And when one guy said, well, if you want the ultimate challenge, this independent duty is about as challenging as you're going to get. And I said, well, sign me up then, and I'll go. And I'd begun to realize over my time in the Navy that I thought I'm actually a pretty good student. which you wouldn't know from my grades in high school, just because I wasn't very focused. But I thought, I think I can get through this school, and I thought that was just like the next challenge.
Well, it looks like you made it through.
I didn't make it through, which I did well in the school, but over the course of the time, I actually got through the entire year. And in that time, my son had been diagnosed, and we had it just seemed like a series of health issues within the family. And I have a tendency sometimes to not want to complain. So my son was hospitalized, my wife was hospitalized during that school year, and I was trying to juggle the school, just the information they give you. You really can't afford to take breaks and not study. And over the course of the year, I did well enough. I tested well enough that I was passing all the tests. I was passing. They have oral boards, and they really run you through the ringer. I was able to pass all those things until they have what they call a practical week. And in that week, you're just dedicated to that classroom the entire week. And they set it up as like a mock deployment, where you're on a submarine, you have a crew of 130 or the number of people they have, and you're responsible for everything that happens over a course of a week. And it's pretty much 24 hours a day, filling out reports and doing all the different things they have to do. And in that week, I struggled mightily. And I went to an academic review board. And finally, I told them, they didn't even realize, but I said, well, we've gone through, between my family members, 3 different hospitalizations, and I was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. I was passing the tests. And when I had to put everything all together, I said I just wasn't able to put it all together. I thought I could, but I couldn't. So they said, what do you want us to do with you? And I said, I want you to keep me in, because I can do this. If I can be remediated, I can learn this. As it turned out, the commanding officer of the school was a single mother of a special needs child. And so they recommended keeping me in the school. And then I went in, and she said, come on in, Petty Officer Enderle, have a seat. I sat down. She said, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm disenrolling you. And I had mixed emotions, but I began to cry right on the spot. She said, why are you crying? And I said, because I don't want to say I quit. But I felt like if I had continued on and gone on to a submarine, I wouldn't have had a family when I came back with the health issues and everything else. I wanted to be home. I just didn't want to be the person to say that I didn't want to move forward.
So since you weren't going on a sub, what was your next step?
They had, she called up to the base, and this was on the submarine base in New London. She called up, and it turned out there was a billet that was available for an X-ray tech. And she said, you know, if you want to stay here, I would rather you not put your family through a transition of another move. They like bent over backwards to try to accommodate us. She said, we're going to set you up with 3-year orders, and you and your family won't have to move. You can stay here with the family. You guys can get stabilized. And if you ever want to come back to the school, you can enroll again. And I appreciated that. That meant a lot, because that may have saved my family, like right at that point.
So then you were stationed at Groton for 3 more years? For
3 years, as an X-ray tech.
And did you stay right on the sub base and work in that clinic?
I stayed right there for the 3 years, and we lived in the Navy housing at that time.
So what was your daily life like then for the next 3 years while you were at Groton?
It was, we did exactly what she recommended. We spent more time together, and tried to take care of the different health things. We realized that my son had a diagnosis of autism, so we realized trying to get him involved in that. Especially my wife was really involved in finding out what programs are available and how to advocate. And in that point, I decided to go to school. And my theory was I'm going to go to school for special education so I can learn to help advocate for him, for my son, and also maybe there was something I could do at home that would supplement what he was learning in school. And I'd wanted to go to school for a long time, and I don't know that I was passionate enough to start any single course. And all of a sudden, right at that point, I thought, I think I know what I want to do. I think that's something I could do where I could study it on my own time. And I think if you can study or do any kind of work on your own time, then that's probably a good direction to go into as far as a career field.
Where did you go to school?
I started going online, and originally I went to Excelsior College, and I finished there, and then I went to a North Central University. And there was a friend of mine on the ship that went there, and he said that they were very good to deal with, and they had education of exceptional children is what they called it. He said they had a very good program, so I went there.
And was that an online course also?
Yes.
So while you were taking these online courses in special education, you were working your regular day schedule as an X-ray technician at the clinic?
Yep.
So what did you do then?
Well, I finished my degree, and after my 3-year orders, at that time in the Navy, it was pretty easy to extend for a year. They had extensions, and at that point, the Navy thinking was, well, we're saving money if we have people who want to stay in an area, then we're not paying to move people. So I extended for 1 year, and then I extended for another year, a year after that. And in that time, we bought a house, and then I began to think I would sort of like to stay in this area. And it seemed like the longer I was in the area, the more I liked it. And I thought I could stay here. I was almost getting to within a point that I thought if there was a way that I could stay here to the end of my career, I would. And
by this point, you had decided you were going to make the Navy your career?
Yes. When I came out of the independent duty school, I had to re-enlist. And I think a lot of people in the Navy generally, they say, if you're going to go over 10 years, then that's pretty much it. So that was the conversation. I said, I'm at 9 years, and if I re-enlist now, it's like enlisting for 11 years. If I stay in, then that's it, I'm staying in. And we decided to just stay in. So at that point, I thought that was it. I was going to stay in for the 20.
So 2 extensions at Groton, and then where did you go?
Well, I had a conversation with my master chief, and he's a senior enlisted person for New England. He came down. I happened to be walking through the building, and he passed by and he said, "Enderle, where do you think you're going to be going? Because you're probably not going to get another extension." And I said, "I realize that." I said, "Well, a ship or a Marine unit, they'll send me." And I thought, I realize it's run its course. I've stayed here as long as I could. And he said, "Well, I have an offer for you. I just want you to think about this. You can give me 1 year." At first it was 6 months, and then it became a year, and it was a little bit of a roller coaster. But in the end, he said, "You give me 1 year, you can deploy." And they had a program at that point. And when I said that I was in the Navy, but I served with the Army and Air Force, they just were starting in 2006 a program called an Individual Augmentee Program. And I think the way I've always understood it is that the Army was bearing the brunt of the manning of personnel in Iraq. And a lot of those guys I found out in my deployment had deployed multiple times. They were going and barely coming back, and they were sending them right back over, and their deployments were 12, 15, or 18 months. And I think a lot of that, they were beginning to see, I think, the stress that it was putting on the Army. So the way I always thought it is that they began to go out to the other services and say, if you guys can do things to help supplement our people there, then they get a little bit more of a break, and we can get Army guys who are specialized out doing what they're trained to do, and then we can have other people. One of the jobs was guarding detainees in the detainee centers, and the population was growing quite a bit. As a medical person, when I went, by the time I got there, they separated the medical personnel for us.
So you went. Does that mean you took the offer that the chief gave you?
I did. At first, he said, if you get, as a part of this program, he said, when you come back, you can extend here in Groton for a year. He said, that gets you to 17 years. And he said, and then also a part of the program is you get priority orders. And what he meant by that is he said, you could conceivably give me 1 year and then come back and stay here until your 20-year mark if you choose to retire at that point, and your family will never go through another move again. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, can I call home and at least talk about it? This is a year. And he said, absolutely. So I called, and while I was on the phone, the orders popped up on my screen. And I was just, I was saying, well, this is what's coming up, and I was explaining the whole thing. And the orders popped up, and then I just thought, well, I'm pretty much, going to go anyway. And but I could think of all the benefits of it. So I thought to myself, in the long run, I think it'll be, it can be a good thing to never go through moves again.
What was the date? What year was this then that you deployed to Iraq?
This was at the end of 2006, and then in February we left. And then we were back late in January the following year, 2008.
So you left Groton in February of 2006 or 2007?
2007. And that was as a part of the surge.
What can you tell me about the surge, and then about how you got there and what your duties were once you arrived?
Well, when they first gave us the orders, we had about 3 weeks. I got the orders, and basically it was 3 weeks. It was during the holidays. And I got the plane tickets almost right away. They issued uniforms for some of the different things. So they were trying to prepare us for it. There was some training I had to go through. There were some different qualifications I had to go through in order to deploy, and then once again it's filling out a power of attorney and wills and things like that. So it's a busy 3 weeks. And they actually have some people who deploy in quite a bit less of amount of a time, and I don't know how they do it. But for us, it was pretty busy, and we just tried to make the most of the time. But a year is a long time, I think, for a family to absorb before you leave.
How did you actually get to Iraq? Did you go over as an individual, or did you go with a unit? Did you go on a ship?
I went, first I had to go to training, and it was in Fort Bliss. And they said, you're going to be going with the Army, and the training is going to be in Fort Bliss. So they flew, there were 4 people from the submarine base who were going as a part of this individual augmentee program. And we didn't fly together. They just flew us there, and then it seemed like we landed in a small airport outside of Los Angeles. And actually, originally we went to Port Hueneme, now that I'm thinking about it. Port Hueneme is in California, and we went there for a short period of time just for our processing before we went to Fort Bliss. But the funny thing was that when we landed in this small airport, the only people who were in the airport were people who were a part of our group that were going. And we all looked like a bunch of military guys with sea bags, and it's like, are you going? Yeah, me. So eventually we sort of met in the airport, a lot of us. And then from there we went to Fort Bliss, and then it was a team building process there.
How long was the training at Fort Bliss?
We were there for about 2 months. We were there for about 2 months, and it was we were among the first groups. I don't think we were the first, but we were among the first groups. And it was an experience for a lot of people. I think even for the Army, our group, all told, was 420 people. So we went over 115 or to 130 people at a time. We were just going over like in, they trained us like in 3 groups, and then they sent us over. So they, but it was a challenge, I think, for them, because they sort of had, their culture is a little different than ours. They speak a different language.
Yeah, how did you Navy guys get along with the Army?
We got along very well with them. They tried to get us to say hua. And I was the guy in the back of the classroom saying, aye, aye. Then the Army guy would, did somebody say aye? Oh, the guy back there, he's a troublemaker. But they appreciated all throughout the training. Each Army instructor that would come up would say, we really appreciate what you guys are doing. We know that this right now is a very new program. And they really tried to get us used to what we had to know about their culture and their mission and what they expected from us. But we got along really well. We really felt like we were doing something good.
Now, but when you were training, were you training with the actual Army personnel that you were going to be stationed with in Iraq, or was it going to be a different group of guys once you got over there?
The Army instructors, that was their job, and each of the instructors, they were combat veterans. They're like, I've done 3 tours in Iraq, and this is my experience. They would try to relate their experiences to us. But most of the training was just done with the Navy, and then they were overseeing us, and they were telling us we would go through maybe convoy training, and we would go through all the different phases of the Army training. So they, but they were there like each step along the way, saying, okay, you guys need to do this, or this you need to think about, or this is what you need to take from this training.
When you went to Iraq, did you go as an individual, or did several of your Navy buddies go with you? Did you go as a group? We went as a group. How many of you went together in your group?
It was about 135 in our group.
And where did they send you?
They sent us, and I'm trying to think now, I think they flew us, we went to Germany, and then from Germany we flew to Kuwait. And then they had, it was just like a period of time where we could get used to the weather there. And I think, I'm not sure exactly, I think it was maybe from a few days to, like 3 to 6 days or so, just to get used to the climate. And then from there, they just brought us to helicopters and flew us in 3 helicopters at a time.
Where in Iraq did you land?
In Camp Bucca, which is in the southern part of Iraq. It actually wasn't very far from the border. I think it was about 30 miles from the border, so, and I'm just guessing on the distance. But it wasn't very far. It was like in the deep southern part.
What can you tell me about Camp Bucca? How large was it? What kind of personnel did it have?
Well, when we got there, when we got there, they were in the process of expanding it, and I think they had maybe 15-foot high sand berms around it, but they were in the process of expanding. They had sort of the blocks, they would call it, where the detainees were, and I think they were going from maybe 8 to 20, and I think they wound up with somewhere around 30 different blocks where the people would be, and then the guard training that they would have, we'd learn some things about the culture and what to do, what not to do, and things like that. But it was a pretty isolated place for the most part, and yeah, it was pretty isolated. There really didn't seem to be a lot of. There was one place we called beautiful downtown Camp Bucca, and it just was like a series of little huts, and they would have maybe a little restaurant and like small things. But the population of the base expanded to almost, in that year, to almost 5,000 people, the majority of them Army.
What were your duties once you arrived at Camp Bucca and you knew that's where you were going to stay? Your duties were going to be in the medical arena, So where were you assigned? Did they have a clinic or a hospital right there on the base?
They have, the Army has what they call troop medical centers. And they had a great deal of medical personnel there already. In each of the detention compounds, they would have what they call wire corpsmen. And they would be there to help. They had a hospital right in the middle of all these compounds where the detainees, if they had something that needed to be treated, they could be brought in and treated. So they had a great deal of medical personnel. I was in a smaller area for most of the time that they just called the Troop Medical Center. And that was just primarily like Army. It was just personnel from the base or contractors that would come in for treatment there.
So you were primarily there to treat Army personnel?
Yep.
Did you work on any of the detainees? Any medical assistance while you were there?
At points we did. If I went down to the hospital, then they were just there to treat detainees.
Were they two separate facilities?
Yep. Yeah, they had the hospital down there was where the great majority of the doctors and different things they actually had a running emergency room there, and there was they stayed pretty busy.
At the medical facility where you were, what was your schedule like, and what kinds of injuries or disease did you treat mostly?
They had, we would wake up in the morning. I would usually get up real early in the morning anyway. But our days were maybe like a 10-hour day, and we'd have a chance to go get lunch or something else along the way. The experience with the convoy teams was a little bit different. But at the Troop Medical Center, we would have like maybe a 10-hour day, and then they would have periods of time if it was slow where the nurses or their doctors there would also do training. And that was the majority of it there. We would have time to sort of get caught up on administrative things along the way. And I also had responsibilities among my Navy unit to make sure their immunizations and medical records and things like that were being maintained. There were 12 of us, and I was a senior person of the 12. But typically, I think some of the things they were worried about is they would have leishmaniasis was one thing that's something that's that you can get from flies. Some people would get bites here and there. We never saw a scorpion bite, but there were scorpions there. They had camel spiders, and there were a couple of camel spider bites. And then a lot of training.
How would you classify the facility? Was it of the same standard, say, as an American clinic in a downtown city?
I think
was it more like a field hospital kind of thing?
It was like a field hospital. The pharmacy formulary is actually pretty good for being out in such an isolated place, and I thought the medical care was a pretty high standard. They had some really qualified people there, and some of the medics were very good. I mean, we would go through our sick call things, and then at other times you were going through. It just seemed like there was always something to do.
How many beds did you have? How many patients could you hold?
The Troop Medical Center didn't have any. It was just for outpatients. But the hospital actually had wards, and I'm sure it could have held it could have held a bunch. I'm guessing at maybe 100 or so. But they had a series of different wards where people could go for small surgeries and just stabilization. Overheating, I think, may have been something that we treated more than anything.
Now, you were the senior staff there. What did you say? There were 12 men underneath you who were all corpsmen. Were they all Navy corpsmen, or did you have any Army?
I mostly, they had senior Army personnel there that sort of managed theirs. I think just by virtue of being sort of a senior person, I really wasn't actually in charge, but they were just trained to listen to the senior person. So I could, if someone else wasn't there and I would tell them to do something, they would do it. But I just was more, I stayed with the Navy side of things to make sure their advancement stuff was up to snuff, or if there was anything they needed anywhere on any of the compounds, then any kinds of issues, then we would just try to deal with it as a group, a Navy group.
Since you were in the middle of nowhere, were your barracks close by when you were not on duty? Where did you have to go back to sleep? They
would, they either had tents, and then eventually they had something that's like a small, like maybe a sawed-off trailer that they would get. We had tents originally, and they would actually put air conditioning units in them because they were heavy tents. And the heat was so hard on those units that a lot of times the units would just freeze. They would just like freeze over. It was the conditions could really be harsh. But we wouldn't walk very far from where we were. Maybe it was a quarter mile or so to go where the tents were.
Now, I know that we had talked earlier about the convoy missions and the convoy teams, and you ended up at some point going out on convoys. Can you tell me how that happened?
Well, they had at one point I was in sick call, and the convoy team came in, and one of the guys came in, and those guys they'd always come back looking really tired, and the whole group came in. It just seemed like they did everything together. And I'd had a curiosity of what it was like. I think a lot of times the people that were on the compound that never left, I think they were curious about it. You'd be apprehensive anytime you're leaving the security of that base. But I think a lot of people were curious about it. But one of the guys came in, and he was really tired. And he came in, and he came into the room. And he said, I said, okay, what brings you in? And, sometimes they'd say, well, overheated or different things. And he didn't respond right away. And after a while, he just said, I'm just tired. And I said, something along the lines of, well, can you be a little more specific? I mean, what can I help you with? Is there a certain symptom? Which one do you want to tackle first that we can get to? And he said, I'm just tired. And I said, well, what's going on? What's going on? And he said, well, I've been going out on these convoys for a number of days a week. And the security convoys were pretty long. You're wearing a lot of gear. You're sitting in the back of this vehicle. There's no air conditioning. There's no ventilation. There aren't open windows. And the only thing that's open is where the gunner is. And he's like, I'm tired. I've been doing this for a while. And I said, well, what kind of a break do you get? I mean, don't they have other people doing it? And he said, well, they do, but not really. And he said, and I think, I think one of the senior guys got mad at me, and I just wound up on this convoy, indefinitely. So I said, well, hold on one second, and I went, and I had a good rapport with the Army First Sergeant at the time, and I said, hold on, and I walked in, I said, First Sergeant, do you have a second? And he said, yeah, and I said, there's a guy in the room, I mean, he looks like death warmed over. But maybe, why is he going out on convoys, like so many days in a row? I mean, so the first sergeant was a little defensive about it, and he said, wait a minute now. Now I've got, the Navy guy coming in and telling me, he said, you're not coming in here to tell me how to run my unit, are you? And I said, no, First Sergeant, I'm just saying this guy's gone out a bunch of times in a row, and he's worn out. I mean, how much more are you going to make people do? What, isn't there a rotation where this place is filled with medical personnel? Why isn't someone else going out? And I was mostly saying it, I think, out of concern and everything else, and I probably was a little out of place. And he looked at me and he said, okay, I'll tell you what. He said, are you willing to go out on one of these convoy teams? And so I think both of us were, sort of like, and I just said, yeah, I'll go out on one of these convoy teams. If that's what it takes, sure, I will. So he sort of smiled a little bit. He's just going, oh, I sort of like you've got more spunk than I thought, I think is probably what he was thinking. But one thing led to another, and after a while he said, they're not going to let you go out on this team. So I said, I'm going to ask my commanding officer. And if he says yes, I'm going. So I went back to the commanding officer, and I said, sir, do you have a minute? And then, and I went in and I said I wanted to go out on this team. And he said, not only no, but absolutely no. Our mission here is to do, our mission is very specific. And we're sent here to help so that the Army has specialists who go out and do things. He said they have specialists who are doing this already. This is not our mission. And he said, and if I sent you out there and something happened to you, how do you think I'm going to feel? And I said, sir, I would like to be able to have the opportunity to do it. And I explained to him a little bit about what was going on. I said, I'd like to have the opportunity to do it. And he said, I'm not going to let you do it. And I said, sir, I've been going to school. I haven't been able to take online courses in the time we were here, but I said, I've been going to school because I hope at some point in my life I can do something that will help returning veterans transition back from war zones. And I can't know that if I haven't been out there. From where I'm sitting right now, I don't know what I can do to help anybody. And he thought about it for a second. He said, so you want to do this, afterwards? And at that time, I was like, I feel passionate about it. I would like to do it. So he granted me the permission to go. And he said, I'm just going to tell you now, if something happens to you, I'm going to kill you. And I said, I understand, sir. But I said, I appreciated it with mixed emotions. Because I was afraid. But I told them, I said, we're going to stay safe. So far, the safety record for the most part for people who'd gone out was actually pretty good from there. So I just told them that I wanted to be able to do it. So I went back to the first sergeant and I said, if I'm going, I think there should be a rotation of other people to go too. And he said, okay. And they changed the rotation a little bit.
Were you then on convoy missions on a regular basis, or did you just go out one time?
We went out, I think I went out, I'm trying to think, I would guess it's about 10 times now. I don't, but there were a series of times. I didn't go out every day, or I wasn't like some of the security teams went out more frequently than I did. But I went out a number of times, and it was actually the Air Force that coordinated the convoy team I was on was primarily an Air Force team.
Can you describe what one of these missions on a convoy team would typically be like?
Our job was to go from was to take detainees, because we were at a detention center, and people would be processed through, and these detainees, the trial period they would have to go, they were trying to determine if they were high-value targets or if there were reasons to keep them. And they were trying to reduce the population. They thought maybe if a person is a low risk, or for some other, that they actually had a program that they were allowing the Iraqis to run that was sort of like a rehab program where they would try to take people with extremist mentalities and try to bring them back toward the moderate center where they wouldn't feel obligated by religion or by culture or anything else to act out. And they were thinking, well, if these people can be brought back to moderation, maybe we can let some of these people go. Maybe they weren't held for something serious. But our job on the convoy was to take a number of these detainees and transport them up to Baghdad. So we would leave the base and go over to Basra, and then from there we would fly from Basra up to Baghdad, and bring these detainees. Then they would have another convoy team that would wait for us there, and then they would take these. They would take all this group. They would check everybody out, and then they would take that group and bring them in for the trial. And in the meantime, they would exchange with us some people that they had determined that they were dangerous enough to keep in detention. And then we would take those guys and bring them back with us. We'd fly back to Basra, and then we would have to convoy back to the detention center with these high-value targets.
Well, like how long would it take from when you left the base until when you got back? Is this a matter of 2 hours or 12 hours?
Yeah, it was a good 12 hours. Yeah, it was. We would leave usually right after dark. We would. Well, I shouldn't say usually. We would leave after dark, and then we would zip along. And I was always surprised at the good condition of their highways. It didn't seem like anything else was in good condition, but it seemed like their highways were in really good shape. But then we would get back. It would be like the next morning.
Did you ever run into any military problems on the way, or have any incidents?
There was one incident in particular, and in this case, a lot of the detainees, in the way the tribes in Iraq were distributed, the southern part was predominantly Shiite, and a lot of the extremists or the Al-Qaeda types were predominantly Sunni. But a lot of the people in the southern part of Iraq believed that all these detainees were Sunni extremists that were carrying out. They were like right in this civil war where these two sects were really just death was every day. There were bombings. So going through with a bunch of detainees through a Shiite area that these people believed were high-value Sunni targets or extremists or Al-Qaeda or a number of the different names could be pretty dangerous. So in one instance, I think the bombs that had been set, I think, may have been set more for them even than us. We just happened to be the ones bringing them along. And so that was pretty much it. And then there was gunfire after that, and we just managed to get through. There weren't any injuries.
Did you ever have regrets that you talked your commanding officer into letting you go on convoys?
No. I was asked to describe the one moment because I had when I came back, I from that time when we went out, and I said, well, it was a strange sensation of an entire vehicle, all four tires just moving completely sideways. And in that moment, I think you think of almost too many things for the human brain to even put together. It's a real fragmented second of time. But I could remember a lot of different things. The gun was loaded, and the gunshots, and just everything else. And we didn't get out of the vehicles. But I was thinking to myself, we're going to stop. We're going to get out of these vehicles. And that whole moment of mortality is right there. I was thinking about people around me, and it's hard to describe it all. It's like a real fragmented moment in time.
So you were actually driving along. You had no idea that this was going to happen. Was it just a sudden boom? There was an explosion. Did it disable your vehicle?
It didn't disable any vehicles.
It just moved it from the explosion blast.
Yeah, and we were well. The way we were taught in the army when the Army trained us is nothing was disabled, and the vehicles are able to communicate with each other. So somehow or another, they ascertained that the vehicles were all functional, and then you just race through it, and you get beyond that point where you feel safe again, and then you stop and sort of take an inventory. Is everybody okay? Do we have everything all in one piece? And then you go on, but you just keep forging your way through. You don't stop at that point. So it turned out there were no injuries, which was the important thing.
That still had to be pretty scary. when your commanding officer found out about that incident, did he have second thoughts about sending you out anymore in the future?
That was one of the final ones. And I didn't, my plan was to not say anything. And somehow or another from that whole thing, I felt, it's strange how often there's like a complete split of, you can feel two completely opposite things. I never noticed it until I was deployed or in that instance where you can feel complete opposite emotions at the exact time, same time, and it makes sense. And after that, I seem to notice quite a bit that there were times that that can happen. I never really thought about that. I thought, how is that possible? I feel like I'm splitting in half. But it is possible, at least in that environment.
Now, you also said that at times, but not as a regular course of things, you worked with the detainees and assisting with their medical care. Can you tell me what that was like?
Some of the detainees were, if they knew English, they were already, some of them were pretty friendly. And it would depend sometimes on the sects. Then they would have that, they wouldn't put everyone all in the same one. They would try to keep like the groups of like-minded people in the same spot because it would have been dangerous, I think, otherwise. They would fight among themselves. But some of them, when we would go in, they would tell us beforehand, well, this is a group that they would describe them as Wahhabi. And that's more, they're a very strict, they have a very strict interpretation of the Quran. And many of them, that they wouldn't even want to look at us at all. And if they did, it didn't look like they were looking at us like, like they wanted to strike up a conversation with us. So they were not a real friendly bunch. But some of the times they would come in if there was any kind of an outbreak, and like in one instance, they thought there might be a tuberculosis outbreak. One person tested positive. So they said, well, we have to test everybody because we if anything is, we don't want an epidemic. So we would have to go in, and then the interpreter would come in and explain to them what's going on. Some of them didn't want to, some of them were like, if it's coming from any of these people, I don't even want them to touch me. They didn't want to look at us. They didn't want to be around us. And then some of them just sort of relented. They're saying, look, it's for your own, your own health, your own benefit. And so we would do it, and we would go in. But the medical personnel going into the compounds and in the hospital we didn't carry weapons. And that was just how things worked. So we didn't carry weapons. And I think in some ways, maybe that helped. I sort of thought that could be a disadvantage really quickly too. But I think in some ways the message to them is that we're there more like in a humanitarian aspect.
How many detainees would you say that you were medical staff for?
Boy, there were about 15,000 in the
15,000?
15,000. So they had, like, between the hospital, and sometimes they would ask for supplemental staff. They would have the corpsmen and the medics would pretty much come from everywhere.